Hi there, this is Professor Nathanson. This video is going to be on the issue of what does it mean to be a citizen of a state for purposes of diversity jurisdiction. If we take a look at the Constitution, Article 3, Section 2, now this provision gives us the outer limits of federal court subject matter jurisdiction, and we see there's several places where the language concerns citizens of states. So we have possible claims between citizens of different states. In other words, the Constitution would not permit a lawsuit of Florida versus Florida rising under state law, such as negligence. That's not going to be permitted. But it would permit a lawsuit between a citizen of the state of Florida versus a citizen of the state of Pennsylvania for negligence. Under the Constitution, that's just fine. And Article 3, Section 2 has other references to citizens of a state. I'll just point out one that's going to be relevant to our studies in class is the last clause, claims between a state or the citizens thereof and foreign states, citizens, or subjects. In other words, between the citizens of a state on the one hand and foreign citizens or subjects on the other. And we talked about that in class as a matter of example of alienage jurisdiction under the Constitution. That would be, for example, citizen of Florida versus citizen of Germany in federal court for a negligence claim. The language is also extremely important to 1332A, the diversity statute, which is the statute through which Congress has given original jurisdiction to the trial courts in the federal system. We call those district courts. And there's three places where this language shows up. 1332A1 permits a lawsuit between citizens of different states. 1332A2 permits lawsuits between citizens of a state on one hand and citizens or subjects of foreign states on the other. And A3 permits lawsuit between citizens of different states in which you add foreign parties, citizens or subjects of a foreign state. Now, all of this tells us the next thing we need to do is think about, well, what does it mean to be a citizen of a state? Okay, now you can look in 1332A, but you're not going to find anything that tells us what it means to be a citizen of a state, nor will you find anything in the text of the Constitution that tells you what it means. Instead, what we have to do is look in the case law. Now here, what you're going to have to do is of course, read the material in the case book, particularly the Gordon case, the Moz case, and the notes that the casebook has following those cases. What I'm going to do instead is kind of break this down in a more general level. Okay, so you got to look to the cases. And the cases are what flesh out the meaning of citizen of a state. Two conditions must be met. First, the party must be a U.S. citizen. Second, the party must be domiciled in a state of the U.S. Okay, so let's think of a basic example. Okay, let's call this person Bruce and say Bruce is born in the USA. All right, so Bruce has birthright citizenship. And let's say Bruce is domiciled in the state of New Jersey. Okay. Okay, so here's Bruce. All right, he's a U.S. citizen because he was born in the United States. He's got birthright citizenship. And we're going to posit, we're going to assume for our hypo that he is domiciled in the state of New Jersey. Now let's compare Bruce to somebody who is still a U.S. citizen. Let's say we have Johnny, who's born in the USA, in fact, born in Miramar, Florida. This person has long since permanently moved to France. Okay, born in Florida, but now lives in France. And here I'm thinking of, Johnny Depp. Okay, I'm no expert in Mr. Depp's life, but by my understanding, Depp was born in Miramar, Florida, but now lives in France, and that's his home. That's where he lives with the intent to stay. All right. What does that mean for purposes of diversity? Well, let's go back to the statute. Is Depp a citizen? That's a check. He is. Is he domiciled in a state? No, he is not. Well, both conditions have to be met. In other words, you've got to be a U.S. citizen and domiciled in a state. So, assuming my facts are right about Johnny Depp, he's not a citizen of a state. Now, what does that mean? Suppose, for example, my hypothetical regarding Johnny Depp, he wants to sue a citizen of New York. Okay, Johnny Depp versus citizen of New York for a claim of negligence. Can he file that in federal court? No. No, he can't. Why? Because it's not a suit between a citizen of a state and a citizen of a different state. Okay? Johnny Depp is also not a French citizen. He's just a stateless person. Stateless for purposes of jurisdiction. Stateless refers to somebody who is a citizen but is not domiciled in a state. Okay? So Depp is not a citizen of a state. He's not foreign, so he's not a citizen or subject of a foreign state. Instead, he's stateless. So if Depp wants to sue a citizen of New York in federal court for a state law claim like negligence, he can't do it. Does that mean Depp can't sue the New Yorker? He can, but he just can't do it in federal court. It'll have to be in state court. Equally so, suppose Johnny Depp wants to sue. Okay, so we have Johnny Depp. Let's get our pen back. Let's get Johnny Depp versus our New Yorker. Let's say now it's a federal question like copyright infringement. Can that be in federal court? And the answer is yes. Here it doesn't matter that Depp is stateless because diversity jurisdiction is not at issue. Okay, no diversity jurisdiction under 1332. But as we'll see, this is a federal question under section 1331 and 1338 and can be heard in federal court because we don't care about the citizenship of the parties when there's a federal question. Here's one more hypo before we move along. Suppose we have somebody who is not a U.S. citizen, okay, citizen of Germany, and they are domiciled in the state of Florida, okay. Is this person a citizen of a state? And the answer is going to be no, because you have to have both, okay. Domiciled in state is met, but this person is not a U.S. citizen. Now, in a separate video, we talk about alienage jurisdiction under 1332 A2, okay? This person, the German citizen, domiciled in Florida, is treated as an alien for purposes of diversity. There might be jurisdiction concerning this person, for example, under 1332 A2, but they're not a citizen of a state at all. Now, there's some additional twists that come to 1332 A2. That's covered in a separate video. I won't comment on them further in this video. Well, the next thing to consider is, what does it mean to be domiciled in a state? At this point, what we want to do is look further into the case law. We read the Moz case, we read the Gordon case, and there's the note in the book about the Sadat case. And what these kind of cases tell us can be distilled into another two-part test. To be domiciled in a state, two things have to happen. Number one, you have to have residence in a state of the U.S. And number two, you have to have the requisite intent regarding staying in that state. And I use requisite intent because it's kind of vague, because different cases give us different kinds of intents. So right now, let's just keep it as requisite intent. All right. Now let's illustrate this with a little hypothetical. Imagine that Prof is born in the state of Pennsylvania and that he lives there his whole life. Okay. Well, first, Prof is a citizen of the U.S. because he was born there. Because he was born in Pennsylvania and has lived there his whole life, he is domiciled in PA. That would make him a citizen of the state of Pennsylvania. But let's suppose let's conclude that Prof has accepted a job in Florida. Okay, so now he's gonna move to Florida, and here's what Prof does. He's in Pennsylvania, gets in his car. There's his car. This is a top view. And he's driving from Pennsylvania to Florida. He's got all of his stuff in the car, and he's driving to Florida, but on the way, something bad happens in Georgia, and there's an accident, and Prof is stuck in Georgia. Okay, why? Because there was an accident in Georgia. All right, well, Prof files a lawsuit. Okay, say Prof sues the driver, and in fact, the other driver is from Pennsylvania. So the lawsuit here is going to be Prof, and the defendant is going to be citizen of Pennsylvania. Okay, and the lawsuit is filed in federal court while Prof is stuck in Georgia. What's his citizenship? Well, the answer here is going to be there's no diversity. Why is there no diversity? Well, for diversity to change, two things need to happen, right? First, Prof has to reside in a new state. And second, he's got to have the requisite intent to stay in that state. And I said that Prof has accepted a new job in Florida. However, he does not yet reside in Florida. Why? Because he's stuck in Georgia. Okay, so in terms of diversity law, what we have here is an example of there's intent, to be in the new state, but we do not have yet residence in the new state. Both of these conditions have to be met. So let's summarize here. Okay, Prof, a U.S. citizen? Check. Born in Pennsylvania. Was Prof domiciled in a state? Yes, he was domiciled in Pennsylvania. Why? Because he was born there. Okay. He filed a lawsuit, Prof, versus the other driver, who's a citizen of PA. All right. Is this okay in federal court? No. Why? Well, for Prof's citizenship to change from PA to Florida, he has to have not just the intent to be in Florida, but also residence in Florida. But the problem is he has the intent here to be in Florida, but he has not yet established residence in Florida. Why? Because he was driving from PA to Florida, got stuck in Georgia. Okay, so that tells us once again, for domicile to change, you got to have these two elements. One, new residence, and second, the requisite intent. Keep in mind here, what's interesting is the overall question here is somebody a citizen of a particular state of the U.S., and two conditions have to be met, right? U.S. citizen and domiciled in a state. So citizen of a state looks to two things. But in turn, domiciled in a state itself looks to two things: residence and the requisite intent. Now, this takes us to our next slide, which further breaks up our analysis. Okay, so what is the requisite intent? Okay, well, we've discussed three cases. Now, I'm not going to summarize those cases here. I want you to review those cases. I want you to think about the difference between these cases. But we have at least three different standards regarding the intent. The first one, and this would be a minority approach, would be the Sadat case. Somebody resides in a new state with the intent to stay there for the time at least. For example, suppose I go off and visit in another law school for a year. Well, I'm not staying there permanently, okay? I'm not staying there open-endedly. It's not indefinitely, but I am there for the next year. I'm there for the time at least, all right? The next, which is the majority approach, as reflected in the Gordon case, in the casebook, is the intent to stay indefinitely approach, okay? So, for example, somebody moves to a new city to take a new job. They plan to stay there indefinitely. They don't have a definite time by which they plan to leave. Okay, they're going to stay there indefinitely. All right, now to think about this further, take a look at the case. We can talk about it, but I don't want this video to be too long. So let's just say that time at least may embrace a set time of leaving, whereas indefinitely is open-ended, has no particular time where the person plans to leave. The third approach is the intent to stay permanently approach. That's a minority approach that was expressed in the Moz case. And that's a pretty darn hard standard to meet, isn't it? How many people move to a new state of the U.S. and they plan to stay there forever? That's a pretty rare thing, right? It's a very hard standard to meet. So another way of looking at it is it's pretty easy to set up a new domicile under the time at least standard. It's a little bit harder under the indefinitely standard, and it's very hard to change under the permanently standard. Okay, now let's summarize. Here's our last slide. Same information set up in a different way. And this is something, an approach you might be able to use in your outlines and your class notes and the like. The ultimate question that needs to be answered here is whether or not somebody is a citizen of a state. But citizen of a state itself breaks up into two elements. The first is the person must be a U.S. citizen. The second, they must be domiciled in a state of the U.S. All right. But domiciled in a state itself breaks up into two elements, the first of which is setting up residence in a state, and the second of which is having the requisite intent. Then finally, this last element, requisite intent, has at least three different approaches taken by the courts. Time at least minority, intent to stay indefinitely by Gordon, and the intent to stay permanently by Moz. So you could look at this as kind of like an outline or a flow chart. And while you're studying in my class, and really in any class, when you have law, you should be working on how to break it up in a way that you'll be able to then apply, whether it's in class recitation, or whether it's in an exam, or whether it's in a brief or a memo you write in your legal writing class. It's very important to work on taking things that are complex and then structuring them out in a way that you're able to then take the facts and then analyze them under the governing law in an organized way. So, for example, if you had a diversity scenario in an exam, one of the issues you may need to analyze is whether somebody is a citizen of a particular state or not, right? Well, citizen of a state is itself a sub-element of diversity, right? Because diversity requires, under 1332A1, being a citizen of a state versus a citizen of another state with an amount in controversy that exceeds $75,000. So you can see that what we have up here on the screen is but one element of broader legal considerations, yet even this one element, citizen of a state, has a number of subparts to be considered. Okay, so I suppose the kind of big meta lesson, the big meta learning moment I want us to take away from this is that this is a model for the kind of things you'd like to do in different scenarios to better learn the law. So thank you. I hope this video has been helpful, and till next time.